Akira Nishikiyama was many things to Kiryu. He was a drinking buddy, a karaoke companion, a sworn brother, but most of all, he was family. The two grew up together at Sunflower Orphanage, where they were virtually inseparable. It seemed like they did everything together, even going as far as joining the Yakuza. Whatever happened, they always had each other's backs. They even stood against the Dojima family together in Yakuza 0. The important role that Nishiki played in Kiryu's life makes it all the more tragic when Nishiki goes from family to enemy. Today, I'll be reviewing psychological concepts and case studies to find out what exactly caused this change in Nishiki. But first, a quick spoiler warning for Yakuzas 0, 1, and Kiwami. With that out of the way, let's dive in. One of the most prominent factors behind Nishiki's transformation stems from his inferiority complex. According to Very Well Mind, an inferiority complex is when a person has feelings of inadequacy or inferiority, whether real or imagined. Although Nishiki loved Kiryu dearly, the sheer magnitude of Kiryu's character, accomplishments, and ability intensified Nishiki's insecurities and aggravated his complex. We can actually see signs of his complex as early as Yakuza 0. In this scene where Nishiki tries to kill Kiryu to prevent him from being tortured, Nishiki breaks down and says that he is nobody without Kiryu. This statement is in line with one of the primary characteristics of an inferiority complex, which is displaying signs of low self-esteem. In Yakuza Kiwami, Nishiki's complex gets fleshed out a lot more. There are multiple scenes in Kiwami where we see people directly comparing Nishiki to Kiryu. For instance, in one scene, Nishiki overhears a group of Yakuza talking poorly about him and saying it would have been better if Nishiki went to jail instead of Kiryu. He also overhears him say that Kazuma, who's Nishiki's and Kiryu's adoptive father, favored Kiryu over Nishiki. Additionally, when Nishiki is given his own family to run, his men don't respect him. The principal offender, Matsuhige, even goes as far as telling Nishiki that he would have listened to a man like Kiryu, but not somebody as useless as Nishiki. In another instance, Nishiki is unable to keep his men in check, and they end up taking money from the Kazuma family's territory. After Nishiki's former captain, Kashiwagi, finds out, he beats up Nishiki as a punishment. Kashiwagi eventually forgives Nishiki, but in a moment of frustration, he mutters under his breath that this would never have happened if Kiryu was around. Nishiki overhears this and is visibly hurt by Kashiwagi's remarks. In all of these scenes, we can see from Nishiki's expressions the pain that these comments cause him. Even when the comments are not meant as a serious attack on Nishiki's character, such as Kashiwagi's, Nishiki seems significantly affected by them. This is actually a characteristic of an inferiority complex, which is to have a tendency to overanalyze compliments and criticisms. Perhaps the best example of this symptom in Nishiki is in a scene where he is speaking to Reina after the murder of Dojima and the arrest of Kiryu. After hearing about the news, Reina is in a state of panic and asks Nishiki why he didn't do anything to prevent it. Nishiki internalizes this as Reina blaming him for the entire incident, and out of frustration, he hits her. Although it's obvious that Nishiki suffers from inferiority complex, that alone is not enough to turn him into a seemingly psychopathic killer. Instead, perhaps a primary instigator behind Nishiki's change are the traumatic situations that he had endured. In addition to the mistreatment from his peers and the bullying at the hands of his own men, Nishiki also lost his sister, Yuko. The death of a family member is already traumatic enough, but the way in which Nishiki lost Yuko is even more traumatic. Yuko struggled with poor health, constantly needing surgeries in order to extend her lifespan. Eventually, Yuko's doctor tells Nishiki that she needs a new heart, or else she will die. The doctor elaborates that the only way for her to get a heart in time is through an organ dealer on the black market, the cost of which would be a substantial 30 million yen. Nishiki then agrees to give the doctor the 30 million yen. In order to save his sister, he swallows what pride he has left, and on hands and knees, he begs Matsuhige for help. Even in this desperate, vulnerable moment, Matsuhige chooses to humiliate Nishiki even further, and uses his boot to push Nishiki's face into the ground. Now that Matsuhige has this leverage over Nishiki, he is allowed to do whatever he pleases. This causes Nishiki to completely lose control of his own men. They constantly go over his head, treat him with contempt and disrespect, and take advantage of him. But despite this, Matsuhige does live up to his end of the deal, and eventually, he gets Nishiki the 30 million yen. It is at this point that Nishiki realizes that he's been played. The 30 million yen was obtained from the gambling debts of the very same doctor who promised to save his sister. Nishiki rushes to the hospital to confront the doctor, but upon arriving, finds out that the doctor had already packed up and skipped town. All of Nishiki's hard work and the abuse that he had to put up with was for nothing, and his sister ended up dying. These events completely broke Nishiki, and completely defeated, he resolves to take his own life. As Nishiki prepares to kill himself, Matsuhige enters the room and starts berating him. He calls Nishiki incompetent and compares him to Kiryu again. This was the boiling point for Nishiki, and in a moment of rage, he stabs and kills Matsuhige. After killing Matsuhige, Nishiki comes to the new twisted view that his path was set since he killed Dojima, and that there is no difference in killing one person person or many people. He then resolves to do whatever it takes to rise to the top. Dr. Peter Ash spoke to media outlet CNN about why some people snap and end up killing. He says, in fact, although a person's snap into violence may come as a total surprise, in most cases there's a psychological buildup to that point. Dr. Charles Rayson added that one of the possible causes of such a buildup are feelings of being hopeless, ashamed, and trapped. Needless to say, Nishiki was a prime candidate in feeling these emotions. A psychological buildup of his inferiority complex, constant comparisons to Kiryu, abuse from his peers, and guilt over his sister left him feeling hopeless and trapped. This resulted in him murdering his prime antagonizer, Matsuhige, in a blind fit of rage. Now, I've seen some people suggest that this moment turned Nishiki into a psychopath, but I would like to take a moment to dispel this notion. Although Nishiki does present some of the symptoms of psychopathy, such as cold and callous attitudes and an indifference towards others, I do not believe that he is a psychopath. You see, psychopathy is believed to be a product of nature and nurture. A person is born with the neuromechanisms of a psychopath, such as their inability to experience empathy or emotions. These neuromechanisms then interact with social and environmental factors and may be aggravated or minimized by negative or positive experiences. Some examples of negative environmental factors may consist of adverse childhood experiences or poor parenting. As evident by Nishiki's character, he is highly able to experience emotional pain and empathy. The neuromechanics for psychopathy do not appear to be present in Nishiki. Instead, there are a combination of other psychological processes going on here that change Nishiki. It appears that through these events, Nishiki developed some of the attributes associated with a narcissistic personality disorder. Some of the symptoms relevant to Nishiki are believing that they are superior to others, looking down on other people, taking advantage of others to get what they want, an inability or unwillingness to recognize the needs and feelings of others, being envious of others, such as Nishiki's feelings towards Kiryu, and behaving in arrogant ways. A study by Michael Gross and his colleagues found that narcissism can develop in adulthood. One of the causes of this increase in narcissistic tendencies can derive from experiencing failure. In their research, they found that students who had failed an important exam paradoxically showed an increase in narcissism. The researchers concluded that this spike could be the result of a defensive mechanism where individuals overinflate their self-image in response to failure in order to feel more in control of their own destiny. Similarly, Dr. Dan Newharth suggests that underneath self-centeredness are feelings of being flawed, powerless, and unworthy. Dr. Leon Seltzer adds on to this and states that individuals with an anxiety disorder are afflicted with self-absorption, not because they're selfish or insensitive to others, but because they're locked into bothersome, repetitive thought processes, reflecting fears both about their personal inadequacy and how others might see them. As we've already discussed, these feelings of inadequacy perfectly summarize Nishiki's inferiority complex and his feelings of powerlessness. I think one of Nishiki's quotes perfectly summarizes this mental state. In a scene where he reunites with Kiryu, he tells him that after the events that happened 10 years ago, he is no longer able to trust anyone. He started focusing only on himself and became completely self-absorbed. In addition to these newfound narcissistic tendencies, a study by Jasna Munjiza and colleagues explored the onset of personality disorders in adults by studying people who experienced significant wartime traumas. In their study, they examined 182 participants with personality disorders. Of these participants, 65 people, or about 35%, only developed their personality disorder after experiencing the traumas of war. This group will be referred to as the late onset group, as their personality disorders only developed in adulthood. They found that the late onset group was much more likely to experience schizotypal and schizoid traits. Schizoid personality disorder is a personality disorder characterized by a lack of interest in social relationships, a tendency towards a solitary or sheltered lifestyle, secretiveness, emotional coldness, detachment, and apathy. Some of the traits associated with this personality disorder that we can see in Nishiki are as follows: not wanting or enjoying close relationships, having difficulty expressing emotions, seemingly humorless, indifferent, or emotionally cold to others, and not reacting to praise or critical remarks from others. The last one here is interesting because it showcases a complete change in Nishiki's character. As we previously discussed, Nishiki used to be highly sensitive to criticism by others. However, after his emotional change, we can see that he doesn't care at all what others think about him. We can see this perfectly during a scene of a meeting between Doshima family lieutenants, where he does not care at all the attitude others have towards him. Even though trauma can cause personality changes even deep into adulthood, it's still hard to imagine that these personality changes would cause such a drastic disregard for life, as we see in the case with Nishiki. However, according to Dr. Ash, when a person who is not psychotic commits a homicide, some dehumanize or blind themselves to the person that they're killing. This idea of dehumanization is another core aspect of Nishiki's transformation. After experiencing traumatic event after traumatic event, Nishiki experiences a form of emotional detachment from the world. According to Jennifer Littner, emotional detachments can result from trauma and abuse, and Nishiki was a victim of both. This emotional detachment causes Nishiki to dehumanize everyone around him. Sherry Hamby describes dehumanization as redefining the targets of prejudice and violence by making them seem less human than other people. Anytime someone someone reduces a human to a single characteristic, especially a negative one, they are dehumanizing. This is the case with Nishiki. He has reduced everyone around him to a single characteristic, stepping stones. He came to the twisted belief that everyone around him could be sacrificed for his ambitions of greatness. Nishiki's story is a tragic one. He was a person with a big heart and a man who felt deeply. He struggled his entire life with feelings of inadequacy and low self-worth. A man too kind for the world of the Yakuza, who was eventually broken down by the dark realities of it. He gave into his inner demons and developed a twisted sense of self. His inferiority complex, paired with all the trauma he suffered, caused him to detach from the world and shut it out. In order to protect himself, he overcorrected and developed narcissistic and schizoid tendencies as a form of psychological defense. He could trust in only himself and ended up dehumanizing everyone else around him as a pawn in his great schemes. This is why the ending of Yakuza 1 is so deeply poetic. In the last moments of his life, Nishiki realized the error of his ways and sought atonement. His downward spiral that began with the pull of a trigger and the death of another ends with a final pull of the trigger and his own death. It was his way of taking responsibility for how he lived his life. Class, as always, thanks for checking out Vgology, where we explore the psychology of our favorite video games. I want to take a moment and apologize for the delay in getting this video out. I've been busy with work and personal obligations, but I'll try to get these videos out more often. If you enjoyed this video, then raise a virtual glass by hitting that like and subscribe button, and let's join Kiryu for a drink in Nishiki's memory. You can also check out my other Yakuza psychology videos linked on the screen. And if you want to help support the channel, then make sure to leave a comment or check out my Patreon in the description below. There's the bell. Class dismissed.